Great, great, great. All right, friends, I'm going to do this for the last time and then we'll get going. For everybody who has come in, who is new, please keep yourself on mute. Introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your title, your company, your pronouns. As we go through, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And then after our speakers have spoken, Tanasia will go through, ask the questions out loud. For some folks, we'll unmute you. For some folks, we'll just ask the question straight out. If you have a desperate need to say a thing, put it in the chat. We'll find you, because it's so much fun to find you in the Zoom. Yep, sorry, I sing narrate because that's what I do. And without further ado, let's get started. So if we could, today we are talking about board engagement during the time of COVID and how you keep your board engaged, how you get their buy-in on budgeting, on messaging, on marketing, fundraising, all of that. How do you keep them abreast and how do you talk to them to get the best out of your board? But also talking to board members about how they want to be communicated with. What is their bandwidth? What are their expectations? And so I would love to start today's conversation with gang from SpeakEasy. I'm going to go through and start. I see Paul. Can we unmute Paul? Which I can't do because I am not the admin. T, can you unmute? Fantastic. Paul, and then Paul, you also have, is it Andrew?
Andrew's here.
Andrew, T, can you see Andrew? Can you unmute?
I'm trying to find him. Andrew, if you're on video, could you wave? Thank you.
I figured that would be the easiest way. Jump up and down.
Who else do we have for SpeakEasy? We have Clea.
And Clea, if you're on video, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand too and waving it.
All right.
I don't see her here.
I don't see her here.
She said, I thought I just sent an email that she had signed in, so maybe she's on in process.
She might be. Okay, great.
Alex Baker is on his way.
Okay. So great. Let's start with Paul and Andrew, and then T, my friend, if you see them come in through the waiting room, let's click them on. All right, so Paul, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, and let's go through a very engaging series of questions.
Okay, so I'm Paul Daigneault. I'm the producing artistic director of SpeakEasy Stage. My pronouns are he, him, his.
Hi, my name is Andrew Fulham. I'm the vice president of the board. My pronouns are he, him, his as well.
And this is actually Alex Baker. I'm the board chair of SpeakEasy, and I am also he, him, his.
Excellent. Welcome all. So just going down the line of questions, this is a sort of dual question for the board members and for you, Paul, as the producing artistic director. The board members, what did you expect your involvement to be? And Paul, what did you expect their involvement to be? What was this the same? Was it the same? Was it we need to talk and sort of suss it out?
From a board member perspective, I think there were a few things. Given the timing, and I know a lot of people went through this. For example, we canceled our annual gala 2 weeks before it happened, 10 days before it was supposed to happen. So one of the expectations I feel of the board was to do everything we could to try to make that as successful as it possibly could be. And as we had to pivot to sort of the quote home style gala, what could we do to make that happen in terms of messaging, building community, getting financial support, et cetera. So I think that was one piece. I think a second important piece was really supporting the staff and supporting leadership and supporting Paul, and not to be a help and not a hindrance. Because I think boards at this point can be either. And I think we were pretty conscious of trying to be a help.
Mhm. And how were you brought into the conversation to start, right? This whole thing hits, and how were you approached about, this is what we're looking at, these are the decisions that we have to make? How did that go?
So I think there's some immediate things. We were also in the middle of a show. So there was a conversation about what do we do with the ongoing show and then the gala. And I feel like Paul Daniel has done a really good job of really parsing it out into three parts. There are immediate decisions that need to get made about today or next week. There are more medium-term things that are, through the summer and the season and the budget. And then there are longer-term things. Next season, how do we start thinking about it? And I think Paul Daniel has done a really good job of sort of presenting things in those three buckets that then has helped focus the board on what they need to do.
That's great. And for you, Paul, how do you start this conversation, right?
Well, I really value SpeakEasy's board and any board, and but you also have to remember that people are in it because they believe in you. So oftentimes during the regular year when everything's going hunky-dory, I am very sensitive to board members' time, and I try not to overwhelm them with too much. But this is almost the opposite. I felt like I needed to go into hyperdrive communication. So one of the things we did was Alex Baker and I each week produce a Friday update for the board, where we send out a Friday update, which basically lays out, these are the challenges, these are the things that are going well, appealing to the board during the homestyle gala these are the 5 things that you can do to make this a success, those kinds of things. So they are feeling in the loop and can engage with questions, etc. As a leader of an organization that started years ago as a fringe organization, just me doing every single job and not getting paid a penny, to now an 8-person staff, I know the feeling of that, the burden of, like having the burden of everything on my own shoulders and not wanting to give that burden to anybody else and say like, oh, I can do it. I've got it under control. But in this situation, I felt great. I wouldn't say great peace, but some peace, knowing that others have got my back and are supporting the decisions that the staff is making. Mm-hmm. One final thing is that we as a staff have come up with our recommendations for action to the board and brought them to meetings, instead of going to meetings and saying, what do you think we should do? And not every recommendation has gone like, yes, absolutely, but it's a really good starting point, and it sort of raises confidence in the staff and the board if we have an action plan. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And can I just sort of add something to what Paul said? I also think Paul, and had a meeting of our executive committee yesterday, and Paul actually made a very good comment that I think we're trying to strike the balance of we're being cautious and thinking through implications and what ifs. But Paul, by his nature, is an optimist and forward thinking, so that, Paul, I really appreciate what you said. When we are planning next season, now we have to have the scenarios of what if we have to cancel this show, and what if the theater is limited capacity, and what if an actor gets sick, and all the rest of it. But we are continuing to move forward to see we feel really good about. We also know we don't know what next year is going to look like, but let's not get paralyzed because of it.
There was a great article in the Washington Post written by Michael Kaiser. Don, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, of saying that the organizations that are going to come out of this strong are the ones who are sticking to mission and being bold in their artistic choices and not playing it too safe and going really milquetoast on us. I mean, just think about the noise that's going to happen when we all get to gather again. There's going to be so much going on that the things that are artistically bold are going to, I think, because I'm an eternal optimist, you know, I think are going to float to the top and catch the most attention. And those are the ones that I think, so, you know, and I just have to say that our Speakeasy board, while cautious and is going through lots of scenario planning, is very supportive of programming that is that sticks to mission.
Excellent. This question is for the board. What are the ways that have been most helpful for you in terms of communication? The way, right? You started. Let's see. Alex, you started to talk about this, the sort of weekly check-in email. What are the ways and what's the type of information that's been the most useful for you all right now?
So I mean, Paul and I are the ones who craft the email, so why don't I tell you what the intent is, and then Andrew maybe can respond with, does it land?
Sounds great.
I think we've tried to do a few things, and we have tried to be very transparent about these are the questions for this week, or these are the issues for this week. So some of it has been almost sort of, for a board and their fiduciary responsibility, this is a very challenging time. So I think we've really tried to put out there the good and the bad, because we've had some positive news to report, and I don't want to lose sight of that as well. So that's been part of it. I think we have tried, as Paul said, to really stay true to mission. But then the third component, I would say, in the communication to the board, is we've tried to acknowledge what is going on and not like avoid talking about how this is all really hard and it's stressful and it's challenging and it's emotional and it's uncertain. And if you're struggling, that's fine, because we're all struggling. And I think it is, my sense is people appreciate the frequency of communication, because everything I have read about was sort of the takeaway I got from this. And we historically have had a monthly board email. I think the fact that we're doing a weekly, I do not feel in any way that we are over communicating, and some are longer and some are shorter. So that's sort of, I would say, what the intent is. Andrew, how do you think it's landed as a board member?
So I think it's landed well. I think, and it's also directed, you know, it's both informational. It also reminds board members of what their role is and how they can contribute to these efforts right now. And I think some other things that we've done as a board, we've spent a lot of time making sure that we have the right committees in the right place, that decisions are made. And we haven't gone all helter-skelter with this crisis. And, you know, the finance committee meets and makes recommendations. The executive committee meets and plays its role. And so we're building on the strengths of the board and the different committees in order to continue to move things along and inform people at the right time. And then the other thing I wanted to say, sort of around the Homestyle Gala, is that the development committee was very clear about what the expectations were at different points of time, and very directed messages about board members, you need to log on today and you need to get in touch with 5 people about the bidding. And they were, there was no pussyfooting around it. It's like calling the board members and saying, your job hasn't ended around your fiduciary responsibility. You still have to step up around the gala. You can't just sit on the sofa and hope that all goes well.
Yeah. One piece I would add about communication is we're talking a lot about the board. We also have our board of advisors, which I know many organizations have sort of that second group. Probably 15 minutes after my email to the board goes out, the chair of the board of advisors, who's also on the board of directors, shamelessly steals my text and sends an update to the entire board of advisors, which I think is hugely important, because one of the things we have talked a lot about is how do we keep our communities engaged when we don't have productions, which is the reason people have engaged with us. So I think we're trying to be very conscious about things like that as well.
Excellent. So you've all talked a little bit about how you have been involved in some of the fundraising, right? SpeakEasy, one of the first organizations to sort of pivot on how they were going to have their gala. I'm curious, what other decisions, what other things have been brought to your attention in terms of messaging or strategizing for the future, and how are you involved in those conversations?
Well, I think Paul's mentioned and Alex mentioned, there's a lot of discussion about next season. When do we announce? How do we announce? Again, how do you do it when you can't have a face-to-face opportunity to do that? And how do you be creative about that? So I think that's been a big part of what's been brought. And also, it's the 30th anniversary next year for SpeakEasy. So the conversation's already starting about, in an ideal situation, this is what it'll look like. But if we still can't have events with more than 10 people, 15 people, how do we have this? So that gets back, I think, to my earlier point, that some of it is about the immediacy of the stuff that has to happen now, but it is also thinking about the different scenarios that may come in the fall, when in an ideal situation, we can come back in the theater and have a great night, but there's a very real possibility there'll be restrictions around how many people can be in a theater, not in a theater, when can you start rehearsals, and having those conversations now. I think that's been part of the balance that has been able to be struck, and with leadership from the staff. And I can't emphasize enough Paul's point of, I don't feel like the board is coming, throw out the hands. What do we do? What do we do? We don't know how to go forward. They're coming with, here are options and solutions. We'd love to hear what you have to think. And we're going to go back and make the decision, thanks with your input. And that's been a big help.
Right. And one piece I would add to development, I know Kathy Ayano, our development director, is on the call. So hopefully I'll be correct, Kathy. We've also started having discussions about what might development look like, and looking at historical trends and other sort of crisis kinds of situations, and figuring out, is our focus, clearly our 30th anniversary, we typically have a fall fundraiser, but looking forward, will major gifts be where we have to focus as opposed to the $100 gift? Now, all of us want all gifts of all sizes, but I think you sort of figure out, where do you think the pattern of philanthropy is going to go? And I think Kathy, we had an executive committee meeting yesterday, Kathy and the development committee are sort of starting to think that one through, because we know whatever next year looks like, it's not going to be an ordinary year. And so how do we have to respond appropriately?
Right.
I also think that the idea of communicating with people who have supported you for years and years, or just maybe this year, the underlying message has to be, we're not going anywhere. We're coming back, and we're going to give you what we're going to lead you to the shows that are going to create conversation, which is the sort of our mission. And so let me tell you what some of those things are going to be, and let's continue to have a conversation, and so we can be together in a dark room. And I think that everybody's house is on fire. So to go into panic mode and say, if you don't give us money now, that's the end of us, for me, is not the strategy to go with. Is leading with, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here. One other just thing about fundraising, which is interesting to me, that Kathy just sent out an email this week to people who actually had sponsored us for the past year, but didn't get everything that they put money in for. They're supposed to get ads in the program and ads in the lobby and things like that. And the development department re-strategized and said, well, this is how you're going to get your money's worth. We're going to be posting on social media about you. We're going to be doing X, Y, and Z to let you know that, to get the word out about your business. We're not going after any small businesses to re-up their corporate sponsorship at this point. We want them to know that they're getting their money's worth from what they've already given us, which I think will be great moving forward, because I think there's a little bit of there's confidence in just due diligence. So, yeah.
Great. So I'm looking at the chat. I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat. I have one larger overarching question, but what I would like to do is move on to the Huntington. Speakeasy gang, if you can stay on, please do. If you need to go, you're welcome to leave, but I might come back to this last larger question of how do you target your conversations to get the best out of your board. Although, Paul, I think you've spoken a little bit to this, and I think to the Speakeasy board members, you've also touched on that. But I would love to move on to the Huntington Theatre Company. I see Temple. Temple, would you raise your hand? Are you unmuted?
I am unmuted.
Hello,
Hi, everyone.
hello. And Sharon Malt, who on my screen is like 1 over T. Do you see Sharon? Yay. Hi, friends. If you would introduce yourselves, your name, your titles, your pronouns, all that good stuff, and we'll get started.
We have a couple of other board members on as well.
Oh,
should we ask them to join?
Yeah.
We have Ann Merrifield, who's
raise your
on my
hand.
screen, and Carol Langer.
And Carol. Carol, keep raising your hand. You might be on the next screen.
She's on screen 2.
Screen 2.
Got it. She has her picture up. I don't know if I'm outing her and making her join us.
Got it. Excellent.
So you caught me. I'm multitasking actually, but I'm here.
Please feel free to pipe in if you have things to.
I may have to disappear for a minute because I'm actually on another call, but I'm here. I'm listening. It's like Fraser Crane. I'm listening.
I love it. I love it. Great reference. Well, hello all. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's start.
Yes.
I'll start a question for Temple. What was your expectation of your board members in this moment?
That's a great question. I feel like the expectation of our board
that would
is
be ideal. Yes.
What we would expect anytime and all the time. We really look to them for, Carol's on her other call. There we go. We look to them for leadership and their expertise, and they have been really wonderful and supportive during this time. Especially as we're scenario planning and looking ahead, we have created a task force of board members and key staff to really think out the next few months, the next year. And that's been really helpful and important. And then we're having really big conversations about our capital campaign and our theater renovation and how this situation impacts that. And so we've really looked to them and asked them to step up and share their expertise and experience with us, and they have.
And so Sharon, hi Sharon, if
Hi.
you would introduce, and then same question for you, what was your expectation of the board in this moment and your involvement?
Sure. So my name's Sharon Mald. I'm president of the board of the Huntington. I'm she, her, hers. And I've been president for, I think, 4 years now. So I'm in my second term. So I found that when this happened, I became a very close friend of Michael Masso, our managing director, who has been doing a fantastic job of leading the organization, both on the staff side and the board side. And I feel my role is to, augment his leadership over the board. We have 2 boards, the trustees and the advisors, and to find ways to better communicate, make board members feel involved as much as they want to be, and do what we can to support the theater. So we have some fabulous committee chairs. Ann Merrifield's head of our Spotlight Spectacular, which is taking a whole new form. Carol's our treasurer, and she's been working very hard with the financial staff. So we've really come together.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday, I put out a staff greeting card to our 100+ staff who have been working so hard, and everybody, well, not everybody, but a good portion of the board contributed poems and photographs and messages of encouragement. And we put it together in a video for them and sent it out yesterday.
It actually just arrived while we've been on this call, but I understand it is a very sweet 9-minute video that I'm very much looking forward to watching.
I hope it brings at least one tear to your eye. But we also, right at the beginning, one of our board members jumped in and suggested we start a fund to help operating costs, because ticket revenue, as you all know, is plummeting. So we went just to our trustees and asked them if they would contribute. And this board member offered a challenge, so that if we get 100% participation, doesn't matter what you give, it's all confidential, we can use it to leverage other funds. Mm-hmm. So that's been pretty successful. We're close to 100%. And it's been a great binder for our board to be able to have that project to be able to contribute during this past month. So those are
I'll add that that fund has been very bolstering to our staff too. That the executive committee very early on acted on this idea for a fund, and its official name is the Trustee Emergency Fund for Our Mission and Our People.
Oh,
right.
Mm-hmm.
The mission and our people are really important, and I really appreciate that our board sort of is putting their money where their mouth is.
Yes. And I think two things that have emerged is Michael is putting out a weekly update, which we didn't really have before. We felt weekly was too much for our boards. But I think right now it's helpful to see where we are and what has changed. And I love that whole discussion with SpeakEasy about, striking a balance and being sensitive and walking the line. So that's also what Michael's been trying to do, not overload people with news or kind of depressing news, especially, but keeping us hopeful. So we put in for the PPP funds, and we were able to get those, and we put a task force together to look at the future, as Temple mentioned. Mm-hmm. So, and then Peter Dubois, our artistic director, started a weekly cocktails and conversation via Zoom, our lifeline. And that's been really successful. I think we had 40 people on the last call, and they just talk about what's going on and kind of give hopeful news about things that are still in development that we can latch onto and support. So
to any of the other Huntington board members, is there anything that you'd like to add right now?
No, I think that's a great summary, Sharon, at least of the board piece of what we're doing. There's other outreach from our education team and so forth that's been heartening, I think, for the board to see how engaged the whole team has been.
Great.
Yeah, I think if anything, it's pulled the board together. I mean, we're very much, we're in the same storm and in the same boat, and perhaps in the same digging here, so that we really have to be creative ourselves and look at this in a way like what if this happens? What if that happens? What if we can't produce in the fall? What if we can't produce next year? And those things are scary, but you have to sort of face them as a potential reality. And of course, as most of you probably know, we're also in the midst of talking about renovating, a major renovation to our main stage theater. So, and how does that fit into the mix? And how does the money all go together? And all of those things, which are all really interesting conversations and decisions.
One of the things that I think I'm hearing from both boards right now, both SpeakEasy and Huntington, and I imagine we'll hear with the others, the kind of information that is helpful and the ways in which things that have been helpful to you all in terms of communication. Is it specific messaging, specific asks? What's working for you to keep you from being overwhelmed, but in a place where you can actually be of service?
I think we are keeping our basic structure in place. And since the Huntington's been around for a while, I think those are well established. So our committee chairs are involved and operating with staff. And I think that's, keeping some stability going and keeping us moving forward. So I think the committee structure has been very helpful. I don't know. Anybody else have any?
No, lots of Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Zoom.
certainly zooming quite a bit. Yes.
I'm sure that's true for everyone else also.
Yeah.
It is so encouraging to hear that this board has taken it upon themselves to do some fundraising right for the mission and the people. What other conversations, what other strategizing, messaging conversations have you been involved in? How has that worked for you all?
Temple, do you want to talk about anything that we've done in the outside world?
Sure. I mean, certainly communication with our audience has been really important. As Alex said, if you regularly send a monthly newsletter, now you should be sending a weekly. I think that goes for our audiences as well. Like SpeakEasy, like most organizations, we've had a lot of cancellations and changes. It's been, a shifting, evolving playing field a little bit. And because we're going into this major renovation, this was the summer, of course, that we had decided to experiment with summer programming. And so we were starting our subscription season earlier than we ever have before in our 38-year history, which now it doesn't seem like that's really the right timing for that. So we have been able to push back our production of What the Constitution Means to Me. We have postponed our production of Lackawanna Blues that should have been in July. So it's really the kind of communication that we're sending right now is just keeping people informed about what our plans are. And that's true to our audience, to our staff, and to the board.
Excellent.
And we've set up this task force of both senior staff and a lot of the committee chairs and leaders in the board leaders. We met for the first time yesterday and kind of figured out what our mission's going to be looking forward and how we're going to structure our analysis of, what this COVID thing is all about and, how it's going to affect our operations, coming up with different scenarios. And we have some really great people on our board who've worked for consulting firms and private equity and, people who can really help us, and we want to tap into their expertise. That's another way we're engaging people.
Indeed. And this task force, I think, is really being asked to use all of their creative and strategic thinking and their experience to really advise us on all the different scenarios for the coming year.
Excellent. Huntington friends, this has been really incredible. Thank you so much. I would love to, like I said, if you can stay on the line, please stay on the line. We'll have some more questions towards the end. But I'd love to move on to our art service organization colleagues at the Dance Alliance. So Deborah Cash, I see you. Can you raise your hand? T, do you see Deborah and John Michael? If you would raise your hand as well, keep waving until we find you.
He's on.
I'm on.
Number 2.
On many of the screens. T, do you have them?
There
Hello.
we go.
John Michael.
I'm
Great.
here.
There you are. Excellent. Hi, friends. So
there.
if you would introduce yourselves, title, pronouns, all that good stuff, and I'm going to start grilling you.
Great. I'm John Michael Kennedy. I am a co-chair of the Boston Dance Alliance board. I am he, him, his. Deborah Cash, who's our executive director, is on the line on the chat with me as well. Like StageSource, the Boston Dance Alliance is an art service organization focused primarily on supporting and advocating for the dance community, as you would expect. Always a perpetually fragile community in terms of resources, audience size being smaller than many other disciplines in town, and the employment opportunities being often fewer or smaller than others in this town. So the Dance Alliance is here to be an infrastructure, basically, for the community, where the people that are behind the scenes, we're offering resources, information, financial sponsorship for those small groups that don't have their own nonprofit status. We do audience development work through promotion of dance performances and classes, and then also an annual open call audition like StageSource does. That coincides also with a Dancer Health Day to get our community free access to doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners and other clinicians who can help them with body maintenance and their own personal health while they work. So I think we're a small group. The board is 9 people straight out of what I call central casting. We've got the the attorney, and we've got the HR professional, we've got the marketing person. We have a couple of people who are artists in the community. We have some cultural leaders. So I think our job descriptions pretty much say what it is that we do for the organization, and we serve in many ways because of our size as adjunct staff sometimes. So the most recent thing, obviously, in addition to having to cancel our gala the week before everything got closed down, we have been tapped to be the people to give money through the Dance Relief Fund, which is small but important process for us to do to help dancers with their immediate basic needs. And they're small grants, but they've been impactful. And I think that with Deborah Cash as our executive director, she punches way above the size of this organization and does a lot of incredible work that we've been able to support over the past couple of weeks.
And sorry, while I have you, you also have a fund, right, for both Deborah and John Michael, that you have created during this time to help your membership. Do you want to just talk about that? I want to give you a chance to give that a plug real quick.
Yeah, importantly, it's not our membership, it's our constituency.
Thank you.
People do not have to be Boston Dance Alliance members to get these $250 stipends. They were open to all comers on a first come, first served basis. We had a small amount of seed money and then fundraised like crazy on top of that, and have actually put off fundraising for ourselves, though we are going to be deep in the hole like everybody else at the end of this. We also have delayed, though not in a dangerous way, putting efforts into things like getting our PPP. So it really was, this is the most important thing to do for our mission, and that's why we're going to do it. So that the idea was that, and this is important for any of you who are involved in any of the other relief efforts, was that we had to make a decision how we were going to get this money out as quickly as possible. And we talked to people like Matt MacArthur and Cara Elliott Ortega and some of our colleagues across the country about their practices, pulled together something where essentially as soon as we got money in, it went out. And it went out on a first come, first served basis, so that whereas we have not been in a position to support institutionally organizations like the Dance Complex that Peter runs or Urbanity, we have been able to give stipends to the teaching artists and the dancers who are affiliated with those institutions, so that they can basically pay bills.
Right.
And importantly, we have about, well, to date, we've supported about half as many applicants as we had, which is a great achievement, but it shows the depth of the need and is very frustrating and heartbreaking for me personally, because I know most of the people on that list. And the good news is we closed after 2 weeks of taking applications and have continued to get money as we've been beating the bushes. And so expect that there will be, you know, around a dozen more that we'll be able to give by the end of the month, maybe a little more if we're lucky. But that has basically been job one in this period.
Thank you for sharing that. So then the same general question, John Michael, what did you expect your involvement to be during this time?
Well, I think like others have said on the call here, you know, the expectation was that we would do in some ways the same thing that we've always done, except it's been more intensive. There's been more intensive listening, helping, representing than usual. You know, generally you want your board to focus on those bigger picture issues, but a 30,000 foot view just isn't always possible, especially for a small organization like this one. And we basically decided that we had to triage. Pretty much that's a daily occurrence, is triaging what's important, judging our immediate decisions. What do we need to do right now? What can we hold off on? Deborah talked about the PPP application being one of those decisions that we just had to put off a little bit because we were so actively trying to fundraise for our constituencies. So, you know, so what do we need to focus on as a board, as a conversation that we keep having on a daily basis? I would say that the most connected board members, the executive committee, the co-chairs, we're the ones that are doing and demanding the most from Deborah, I think, at this point. Trying to be practical, trying to give a rapid response. And then we are keeping the other board members, you know, aware of what's going on, calling on them when their particular expertise is needed, things like that.
And Deborah, same question to you. What was your expectation of the board at this time?
Well, some of it was just the kind of belief that they had my back, you know, that I was going to go out on a limb in pivoting the organization very quickly without a kind of long deliberative process, that they really had to believe that, you know, I was listening to what the community needed and was going to do it. And then there were some very clear expectations around the technical needs. So, you know, we have a lawyer who was able to look at some documents that we needed to make sure that they were really, you know, clean and were going to work. John Michael is a publicist. He and I have been doing a lot of work contacting people at the Globe and various other places to get the story out about the needs in the cultural sector and among dancers in particular, and sharing that information so that there's a lot of back and forth about, okay, I'm planning to do this, or here's the conversation I just had. Here's what I just heard from the StageSource Zoom or from the Mass Cultural Council, exactly the Mass Cultural Council Safe Harbor series. So I'm kind of a conduit to that information, but then also can then answer questions and ask them based on what I'm hearing, you know, where do they think things should go? And that's been very much more rapid and in some ways time consuming than we ordinarily would do. Sending an email and getting a response 3 days later doesn't cut it anymore. On mission, so that's never been a problem.
John Michael, for you, what are the ways, the communication methods that have been the most successful for you in getting that rapid information and that rapid response?
Well, certainly Deborah and I are on the phone on an almost daily basis, which is true for the other members of the executive committee too. I think, you know, she touched on a little bit, kind of curating the information that she's been getting from some of these other broader conversations is helpful to us to understand kind of the environment that we're working in. And as things are changing, as new conversations are happening, it's really good to get a quick overview of what's being said. You know, like everyone else on this call, the board members' lives and routines have been upended, and the kind of work we're doing is different than it was 6 weeks ago. And we're trying to read and watch and do everything at the same time. That's, for our own businesses. So having that, quick, detailed response from Deborah, and, keeping the board apprised of what's been happening with the Dance Relief Fund. And I think most importantly, those responses that Deborah gets from the people that we were able to give the small grants to. We were all wondering what $250 could do. Is it even making an impact? But the notes that Deborah's been getting back are just uplifting, and we're so happy that we can be helping people. And I think the board really appreciates seeing that. It motivates us. It, gives us purpose.
And the types of conversations that you've been involved in, fundraising, messaging, can you speak a little to those?
I feel like that's all we've been doing. Fundraising and messaging, it's kind of it should be my new tagline. Well, we hadn't actually discussed early in this process about whether we were going to be opening a relief fund, but we were approached to consider it, and we decided, after a quick board conversation, that we absolutely had to. We were the right people to do it in town. There was a little bit of financial support. And Deborah has been doing the bulk of the fundraising for, more private funds to support this. And it's been part of everything that we've sent out, to our constituents and over the last couple of weeks. So it's been daily. Messaging, like Deborah said, we're trying to, get the word out about what's available to our constituents and our members in terms of, what funding there is available to them, how they can be, cutting through the red tape of the very confusing, unemployment situation. And I think by doing a weekly newsletter to people, it's been a great way to show not only the importance of an art service organization, but also to really provide actual help to the constituents and our members.
Yeah, I guess one other thing that's important that speaks a little bit to what the Huntington and SpeakEasy were doing too, is that to kind of keep your eye on the mission meant changing what we were actually doing with our kind of mechanisms. So we had a weekly e-blast, a MailChimp e-blast anyway, that used to be, and already we had the list in place and all that stuff. But that originally was, or for the last 5 years, has been, here are the performances and workshops coming up this week. And those are all things that you can plan ahead to see, or we're amplifying people's publicity and it goes out to another large group of people. Mm-hmm. We basically pivoted and I made an executive decision that we were going to stop doing that. We were not going to have any sort of effort of trying to keep track of all the online classes and conversations and things, which by anyway were being announced the mornings of the days they were going to happen. So even if we could have done that, it wasn't a very realistic expectation to do it. People were using social media perfectly well to get that information out. But that I started making what we were calling special issues of this newsletter, and then posting them archivally on our website every couple of days as situation changed, with new information, with certain fun videos of a Kathakali dancer washing his hands. This week we have yesterday I posted a youth choir that's doing this dance in South Africa about washing your hands, just kind of keep people's spirits up. And then also some key resources, whether it's the Arts and Business Council and latest information, or particular things where in a very easy to use format where people can click through to that information. And it became just very clear that that was more important for our mission than anything else we could do. And we were just gonna send out a new e-blast as soon as there was new information. So usually they're not, 2 work days together, but I sent one out on Friday and I sent one out on Monday this week because, surprise, surprise, the freelancer applications for unemployment came out 10 days early. So we sent it out yesterday.
I'm talking and I'm on mute because still not used to this. Friends, what I want to do, my good friend Kristen Vangenhoven is on the line with her board member, Wendy Healy, and Kristen's got to run really quickly. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just introduce them, let them talk to it, and then get back to some of the more general questions that I have. Thank you guys. And Dance Alliance, thank you for that fund. It's so critical. Hi, Kristen. Hi. Wendy, raise your hand. T, do you have her? Oh, gone in. Wendy's back on mute.
Nope, she's good now.
Yeah, you're good.
Hello.
Hi, friend. Say hi.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for including us out here in the Berkshires. It's been such great information from everybody, and it's actually really reinforcing to hear a lot of the things that we're also doing at WAM is also what people are doing in Boston. So it's a relief to kind of hear that we're all, doing a lot of the same things. So Dawn, what would you like us to address? I've got about 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Wendy can stay on, but I have a team meeting.
Great. So Kristen, if you want to talk about just a little bit, what were your expectations of the board at this moment of crisis?
So we're a small team and board, and what many other people have said, I wanted to make sure they had my back and the team's back, and I wanted to make sure we were all in the same brain about our goals during COVID. So we really wanted to avoid sense of urgency choices. We really wanted to all together be very transparent, share information, be in contact, make sure that we all really valued the staff at the same level. So for the first 4 weeks, we just kept everybody as they were so we could take the time. Unlike the other Berkshire summer organizations, we didn't have a sense of urgency around having to cancel things or pivot a lot of our programming because we produce in the fall. So we had the blessing of a few weeks to calm our nervous systems down, try to get a little bit more of the lay of the land, and have a sense of transparency together. So what I wanted from the board was to be on the same page about that, to take some time to come up with common goals that fit with our mission of arts and activism, so we could make thoughtful, intentional choices that fit best with how we like to do things.
And then Wendy, conversely, what was your expectation for your involvement in this moment?
Yeah, definitely. And, so many have made so many good points, and I won't reiterate the things that we did that were the same that everybody else did. Just trying to augment some of the things that maybe weren't brought out so much. It's tempting in a crisis to go figure out what it is that you have to go and do, especially when there is so much to do because you're in the middle of a season, or your gala is in 2 weeks. And as Kristen said, we didn't have that. So we did have the luxury of being able to kind of sit and figure out what we wanted to do. One thing I will say, and I just want to sort of bold and underline a few comments that people made, was that the extent to which we had existing structures and committees, I believe that they were absolutely essential to our ability to cope when things got really scary. Our executive committee, our finance, which acts as our finance and our strategic planning committee, became sort of a go-to for, how are we going to figure out the PPP? How are we going to figure out what we want to do with regard to unemployment and that kind of thing? What do we want to do about canceling or not canceling shows in the season, and how do we want to work out that strategy? The meetings that we had on the schedule, having those structures in place. And because we're a fairly new, I know some of these other theaters and the other groups are more mature. If there are any takeaways for newer groups, I would say get those structures built and matured up, because that is going to really serve you in a crisis. Above and beyond that, staying true to the mission is huge. Kristen came across, and I think she mentioned it in the chat, these HowlRound videos. And one in particular that she played for us at the beginning of one of our check-ins featured Stephanie Ibarra, and she talks about leadership in a crisis, and she makes a distinction between resilience, a resilience strategy, and a stability strategy. And because of the type of organization that WAM is, first of all, we're a new-ish organization, and we are a activist organization. Whoever heard of a theater that makes a profit, let alone gives a portion of that profit to other nonprofits? We are, by definition, scrappy and resilient. But in a time of crisis, resilience is absolutely key. And what Stephanie Ibarra says in this wonderful video is that resilience is the type of leadership that leads to transformation. So as you go through a period of crisis, you will come out different. And I believe it was Dawn, I think it was Dawn, from one of the earlier speakers, who was talking about how tactics have to change if you're staying true to your mission. And you will not be the same at the end of the crisis if you're being resilient. Versus stability, if you're leading for stability, the goal is to stay the same. And it's two different things, and stability has its benefits, but in a time of crisis, you cannot necessarily assume that you are trying to hold on to making things stay the same. So I think that it was beautifully said, much better than I said it, but I think kind of what has been of help to us is just the type of organization that we are. We are by nature a resilient organization, and that has helped us get through the crisis.
I'm just going to jump in just because I'm going to jump off, but just 2 extra things. Random acts of kindness for staff members. Like we've had people dropping off, you know, flowers and bottles of wine or sending us emails like keep going. Those have gone such a long way to have the board be doing that for the staff. And the other thing is that one of the team members created an online internal play reading for board and staff and some artists, so that we're not just always talking about the crisis. So we actually have some connections around art together. And then we read the play, we have a discussion, and it's actually really deepened the relationships across the organization between artists, staff, and board. So that's been just a couple of lovely ways added to all of the things that people have been saying, and giving ourselves time to grieve, understanding that productivity isn't going to be at the same level, and having compassion for that because people are dealing with so much. So I'm going to jump off, but thank you so much for including us and for having all the great ideas. And Wendy and I are in the same brain, so thanks all.
Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks, Wendy. When we spoke last week, that idea of resilience versus stability really sort of resonated with me. The idea that a resilient organization is going to change, is going to morph, is going to come out of this a little differently. Whether that's mission, programming, right, vision, values, all of that, right? Stability is going to keep you the same. And there is an opportunity here, like it or not, for us all to morph a little bit. And I don't know. I don't know where that lands for StageSource just yet, but I've been thinking about that all weekend long. So I would like to, I see Clea Winnig, who is joining us from SpeakEasy. Some of your SpeakEasy colleagues have had to jump off. I see Kathy is still on. Welcome, Clea.
Thanks, Dawn.
What I would like to do is sort of move on to this general question that was sort of one of the last of my questions. And then if other people have things that they want to ask about, brainstorm, think about, please put them in the chat. But I think the idea, how as an organization do you structure your conversations and information to pull the best out of your board? How does that thinking happen? What is that thinking? So, right, for those that are still, Deborah, Temple, if you have thoughts on that, or as board members, how you have been spoken to, what has brought the best out of you? I'd love to hear. Bye, John Michael. Or for anyone else who is on this call who is managing a board or who is a board member, what are the ways that you've gotten the best out of each other?
So I think for me, as a member of the SpeakEasy board, I think the fact that the staff and the leadership of the organization is really trying to help us be useful in this time, using us for feedback, we're trying to mine each other's experiences in other organizations when we're trying to deal with things like the SBA and, what are your experiences in another realm that we can perhaps bring. And so I think for me, it's been very important to feel like I am really a partner in the crisis, as opposed to just, okay, we don't really need the board right now. We're in the middle of a crisis. And I think for those of us who love the organizations we serve, the ability to be useful right now is actually an engagement strategy that I think will yield benefit down the line, because we want to do something. And I think SpeakEasy has done a really effective job of finding ways for the board to be engaged in ways that are authentic and useful, as opposed to just, we have to report to you what's happening because you're the board, but we're doing our thing. And I think that's been really important for me as an individual board member.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Dawn.
Yes. Hey, Sharon.
I've just found that people have come out of the woodwork to be supportive, offering matches for our annual fund, just being there, I've been having a lot of good telephone conversations with people that I don't know if I would have made the time for that before, but just getting to know people, our board members, on a personal basis, and getting their kind of fix on how they're feeling right now has been really important for me. So.
Excellent.
Actually, one thing to add, a lot of my interactions with board members has been either one-on-one or me with the executive committee, which is 3 people. And some of that is Zoom and some of that is by email. What we haven't done yet is had a gathering of the entire board. And one of the things that I'm thinking about now, and John Michael, of course, is helping think that through, is what is the best way to engage people on both an update of kind of how this has gone the first month and a half, and also how to set expectations as we go forward. You know, it's very easy for me, given who the board is made up of, to know who to turn to for specific expertise. But what the board needs collectively and how they can work collectively together is still something that, you know, as the rest of you develop those strategies, I'd be eager to hear them, because everybody's very flat out. We have a number of board members who are in a situation where they're also homeschooling young children, and I have not wanted to take too much of their time. So these are the kinds of things that will be very helpful as we go forward.
Wendy.
And we just had a board meeting. I mean, we just did a Zoom meeting, and actually we did it in a very structured fashion, given the fact that it was a Zoom call. It was very, everyone was given a turn to go around and say how they were feeling, you know, and we had a very strict agenda of what we wanted to accomplish. We're usually not that formal. We're not usually that scripted, but under the circumstances, we're doing sort of crisis management. It was appropriate because we wanted to make sure that everyone was heard in an uninterrupted fashion. Mm-hmm. And we did have people that, sort of, some people were on the freaking out end of the spectrum, and some people were more like me. I'm more like in the clouds and philosophical about it. So that's what we did. And it was very productive. Mm. I don't know how large your board is. It was practical for us to do that.
Mm-hmm. I will say, at the risk of being the one person who is not that slick, right? When all of this hit, within that first week, we called a board meeting, and it was sort of a like, what the, like, literally just all of us like, what is going on? And like, things have gotten so much smoother, but like, I just want to acknowledge, for so many of us, I think there was just that moment of like, we do not know what we're seeing, and that like it's changing every minute, and how are we helpful, and what are the needs? And I think for us as a service organization, right, the needs are twofold. What are the needs of the community and the constituents we serve, but also what are the needs of our organization, and how do we keep ourselves going so that we can keep serving our membership? So, right, there was a lot of sort of like double think, and our board is also made this is what I'm hearing, and trying to take all of that in. There was just quite a bit at the beginning. So I just want to give a shout out for the people who didn't quite have it together right away. And for that, mostly, I mean me. We don't have too many questions in the chat, so I want to ask this sort of last question. It came up in some of the things that I was hearing, which is this idea of the what ifs, because there are so many unknowns, right? We are posing to our boards what if questions. What if we can't gather by September? What if our budget looks like this? How are you all navigating those questions? Michael Bobbitt, I see you. Hit it.
Yeah, so one comment on the last thing, how we engage in the board. So I combined the finance committee and the executive committee, and we meet on Fridays for an hour, mostly just to go over our COVID-19 cash flow and to look at whatever scenario planning or other major things are coming up. The board seems to have a lot of faith in that group of people. The other thing I've been doing is when there are workshops or Zoom calls or webinars about specific things that I think a board member would be able to respond to, I'd send them to that. And then I had that board member send notes to the whole board about what they learned in that session. Mm-hmm. That's been helpful. Somehow it coming from a peer lands a little bit more than coming from the executive leader. As far as like the scenario planning, I think the hardest thing has been trying to get the board to not make me do all this math based on imagination and facts, and not having real facts and trends. All this idea of like social distancing and selling at 30% capacity. Well, if you do the math, so social distancing and 30% capacity, does it really quite add up? Because social distancing means I have to actually measure the seats and decide what seats can be sold. It doesn't really take into account people that have been living together and come to theater together. What are we going to do about like taking people's temperature when they come in? How do we distance them in the lobby? Do we have to open many doors? God forbid someone should cough during the middle of a performance.
I'd lose my mind.
So between like that idea of 30% capacity, or let's not open until January, or there's going to be a vaccine in 18 months, all of those are fictional. There's no real science. So to do scenario planning based on that is just intended to make board members feel better. They're still fictional. They're numbers on a paper, but they don't really mean anything. So to me, the scenario plans are, let's move forward, as Michael Kaiser said, with a robust season that has some flexibility to change. I think next year your audiences are going to be okay with you having to change shows or cancel shows. 2, you can do a scenario plan where you go into hibernation mode and you wait until the dust settles. But once you do that, just so you know, if you do that, people are going to stop giving you money, because there's nothing to give you money to if you're not going to do anything until the dust settles. 3, you can look at bankruptcy, Chapter 7 or Chapter 11. That's a scenario to consider. And then 4, you can take your plan A, which is budgeting for next season. You can budget to have 2 shows abruptly canceled. You can cut expenses that are not necessarily for next season. You can budget to not have a growth in audience and fundraising. And then you can do that same budget at 75%, and then at 50%, and then at 25%. Then you have about 6 or 7 scenarios that are still flexible. But to do scenario planning based on unicorns and rainbow dust makes no sense whatsoever. Don't let your board members make you do that work. It's pointless, and it's not useful.
A lot of head nods, a lot of agreement, a lot of head nods. I love it. Are there other folks that want to speak a little bit towards the sort of what if and how we navigate those conversations, as we're now 6 weeks into living in a what if pivot situation?
So one of the things that Boston Dance Alliance was already planning to do ahead of a June or July board retreat that we always do was to convene a series of conversations with other players in the dance ecology to have a sense of kind of what other people were planning to do. That's going to be even more important as we do our, scenario planning and what if modeling. We knew that for reasons that had, nothing to do with COVID, there were a number of shifts happening where as a service organization, there were new needs emerging that we wanted to address, and things that maybe we weren't the best people to do certain things. Or new partnership opportunities that we had already begun to take advantage of, for instance, with Boston Center for the Arts, that might now be available going forward. So I think talking to your colleagues and other parts of the constituency is probably going to work for the theater community and other performing arts communities as well, to have a sense of what they're planning. I'm impressed by the museum community that is trying to think in a collective way about what it means to reopen. And I think that the more that those groundworks can be laid, we also are building a stronger sector, even though it's happening for the worst possible reasons.
I love that we've had this conversation about in many different respects, collective reopening. I think that's something that lightly we might want to bring to one of these conversations. How to moderate that, unclear, but yeah, how do we do that in a thoughtful way together to get the most impact, not just for our audience, but for messaging, for the larger, like for the state? How do we do that in a really healthy and impactful way? Jen Babcock.
Hey guys, Jen from Actor Shakespeare Project, for those of you that don't know me. Just building off of that a little bit, something in terms of scenario planning and the what if questions, something that we found very helpful is that when we forecasted out and started budgeting out for the future, what we did is we completely stripped it back to only the things that we know. And so we've started from a cash forecast from now through the end of the fiscal year for these are the things that we absolutely know for certain that cannot be avoided, and looked at it in terms of what do we need to be able to meet those, and how can we do that? Is it fundraising? Is there a way we can have an event? Is there a way we can get some earned income in the door? And then the flip side of it is then we can start layering in some things like, if we were able to have some programming now, this is what it would look like, and this is how that would impact it, so that we can really look as a direct correlation of what do we need to do to keep operating, assuming that nothing can happen in person, and we can't have any shows, and we can't have any education programs, and we can't have any events, and then say, okay, so by this point, if we can't do this, then we need to do something drastic otherwise, or by this point, because we have a pretty good sense of what a show is going to cost and bring in. So it's easy enough to kind of layer that in after the fact. Mm-hmm. So it was really helpful to us to look in terms of like, this is our baseline. Mm-hmm. This is when we're going to run out of money.
Right. We had that same conversation with our board, what's your, with the executive committee, I should say, what's your panic date? What's the date where you're like, trouble? I'm curious, Jen, for your board, like sort of looking at that, looking at things and this is what we absolutely know, right? Mm-hmm. And then wrestling with the idea of there could be nothing. How do they respond to that conversation?
Actually, it was the first time in a while that they really jumped in with ideas. We have a board that really reacts to what we bring to them as opposed to being super idea generating. And so they really kind of jumped on this idea of like, okay, so then what can we do? So when we said like at this point, this is what we need, they really took it in and we're like, okay, so we need to do a fundraiser at this point. How can we help with that? We need to continue to engage people, and really came up with ideas. Like our board is now next week going to start calling all of our patrons and just having conversations with them. And that was something that came from them. So these ideas of how to start filling the goals, they felt empowered to be able to come up with some ideas and really give their own input on when they thought we could start doing programming, because there wasn't the pressure of it being assumed that it was there.
Excellent. That's fantastic. There's another Igor at Arlington, wow, is doing the same thing. Like, actually started calling his entire list of audience with the help of the board at the beginning of this thing, and just started talking to them about how are they doing. He acknowledged that, right, their membership is of a certain age, and many of them were just interested in talking, but that being able to talk and just be able to say how they were translated into some money for them. Which at the time I was like, you're so smart. But I love that idea of just calling your constituency, calling your board members, calling your donors, right? And enlisting the board to help you in that work right now more than ever. So important. Friends, we are just about at time. And so looking through, I'm not seeing any other questions, and I'm happy to let everybody go to get on with their Tuesday. But I cannot thank you all enough. Thank you to our participants. Thank you to you all for showing up. And we will have more coming in the following weeks. Thanks, everyone.